When my son walked into my clinic visibly nervous, "Mom," he whispered, "I need your help. But it's embarrassing as a doctor." I was used to handling delicate situations, but nothing prepared me for what unfolded. Next, what he revealed that night changed everything. I thought Ike knew about our relationship, and in that moment, I realized our lives were about to change forever. It was mid-January, and the biting chill of winter painted frost patterns across every window pane. The soft hum of heaters filled my clinic, mingling with the sharp scent of antiseptic, a backdrop to my otherwise predictable days at 37. I had settled into the routines of life as a respected family physician. I spent my time divided between my patients and the familiar quiet of home. My husband Richard, a brilliant professor in his late 50s, was a man of intellect but increasingly distant. We had married when I was young and idealistic, but the warmth of our relationship had long since faded. What had started as a passionate love story had quietly transformed into polytech companionship, punctuated by separate rooms and sporadic conversations about bills and groceries. The only bright spot in my life was my son, Ethan, 18-year-old college freshman. He weighs everything I could have hoped for: charming, intelligent, and full of life. Ethan had always been my anchor, his energy filling the house with laughter and a lightness that I desperately needed. Despite the demands of his studies, he visited home, often bringing stories of campus adventures and his dreams for the future. One evening, he returned home from work to find Ethan sprawled on the living room couch, a book in hand. His presence immediately lifted the weight of my day. "Hey Mom," he greeted with a grin that warmed the coldest corners of my heart. "How was work?" Westward and easy banter as I preparator, the sound of his laughter filling the kitchen. But lately, I had noticed sensible changes. His gaze lingered a second longer, his compliments carried a weight I couldn't quite place, and his gestures of care seemed more deliberate. At first, I dismissed these moments as amateur, reading too much into her son's affection. But as the weeks passed, these interactions left a quiet unease I couldn't ignore. That night, as I lay in bed, my thoughts wandered. The silence oft house felt heavy, and I couldn't shake the warmth Ethan's presence brought into my life. He was my son, my pride and joy, but something about our bond was shifting in ways I didn't fully understand. The days grew colder and sodded the rhythm of my marriage. Richard's presence in the house was more like a ghost there, but distant. I buried myself in work, avoiding the void of a relationship. Ethan, however, brought an energy into my life that I had neutralized. I was missing one evening as he returned from a particularly grueling day at the clinic. Ethan was already home, busy in the kitchen. The smell of sautéed vegetables filled the air, and he greeted him with a boyish grin. "Dinner on Meta night, Mom," he announced, clearly proud of his efforts. I laughed, shaking off that exhaustion. "What, the occasion just hot? You deserved a break," he said, his gaze lingering on me a moment longer than usual. We ate together, and as we talked, I found myself relaxing in a way it hadn't in years. Ethan's stories about this college, friends, professors, and ambitions were captivating, yet there was something else, an undercurrent I couldn't quite name. Every now and then, he'd pause, his expression softening. "Ash," looked at me. I told myself it was just affection, the bond of a son and mother, but it stirred something deeper. Something I wasn't ready to confront. Over the next few weeks, small things began to catch my attention. Ethan's compliments became more frequent, his touch more deliberate. He'd brush a strand of hair from my face, linger in the kitchen to keep me company, or sit a little closer on the couch. When we watched a movie, at first I dismissed these gestures, chalking them up to swarm personality. But there was a moment during one of our evening walks when his hand brushed mine, and he didn't pull away. My heart skipped a beat, and immediately reprimanded myself for even noticing. Then there were the looks, those warm, lingering gazes that seemed to say more than words ever could. One night, as he cleaned up after dinner, I turned to find him watching me from the doorway. "What is it?" I asked, forcing a lightness into my voice. "You're just amazing," he said. Simply, his voice steady, almost reverent. I laughed nervously, brushing off the comment, but it stayed with me long after I went to bed that night. I couldn't sleep. The warmth of his words and the intensity of his gaze left me restless, my thoughts spiraling into uncharted territory. The turning point came on a particularly snowy weekend. Ethan suggested we revive an old tradition of walking the wooded trail behind our house. Bundled up against the cold, we ventured out, the snow crunching beneath our boots. The woods were serenity, world muffled by the blanket off-white. As we walked, Ethan stayed close. His presence, a comforting warmth. We stopped at a clearing where the frozen creek glistened under the pale winter sun. Ethan spread out a blanket he'd brought and handed me a thermos of cocoa. Remembered, this was your favorite, he said, his voice soft. I smiled, touched by his thoughtfulness. You're too good to me, Ethan. Someone has to be, he replied, hesitant light, but the look in his eyes was seen anything. But as the conversation quieted, became acutely aware of how close we were sitting. The cold air made my breath visible, mingling with his as we spoke in hushed tones. At one point, he reached out his fingers, brushing mine. The gesture was innocent enough, but the electricity it sent through me was undeniable. Later that evening, as I lay in bed, the weight of it all hit me. I couldn't ignore the shift between us anymore. The lingering looks, the gentle touches, the unspoken tension lines I had always believed were unshakable were beginning to blur, leaving me unsure of what to do next. Winter deepened, and with it, so did these subtle but undeniable shifts between Ethan and me. What once felt like simple affection had begun to take on a new, more complex tone. I found myself looking forward to the moments we shared, those quiet, intimate times that seemed to be just ours. It was unsettling, yet I couldn't bring myself to pull away on the evening. Ethan offered to cook dinner again. His enthusiasm for making me smile had become a habit, one that I couldn't help but find endearing. I watched him in the kitchen, his movements purposeful but clumsy, as he chopped vegetables and stirred a simmering pot. You know, I teased, leaning against the counter, you could have just ordered takeout. He smirked, glancing up at me. Where's Stefan in that? Besides, I want to impress you, I laughed. But his words left a warmth in my chest that I couldn't ignore. It. The atmosphere felt different, charged, almost as if we were dancing around something unspoken. You've been working so hard, he said, his tone sincere. You deserve to be taken care of. For once, the comment caught me off guard, and for a moment I didn't know how to respond. That's sweet of you, Ethan, I said, softly, my voice betraying the swirl of emotions I couldn't quite name. After dinner, we moved to the living room. The fire crackled in the hearth, and the warmth of the room wrapped around us like a cocoon. Chose a light-hearted movie to watch, but my attention wasn't on the screen. Sitting close to Ethan, I couldn't ignore the way his arm brushed against mine, or the way his presence seemed to fill the space between us. At one point, he tornadoed me, his expression serious yet gentle, or really incredible. Mom, do you know feed? The compliment was simple, but the way he said it made my pulse quicken. It tried to keep my tone light. You're biased. Maybe, he replied with a small smile, but it doesn't make it any less true. As the movie ended, he shifted closer, his shoulder pressing lightly against mine. The room fell silent, save for the occasional crackle of the fire. We could feel the weight of his gaze, and when I turned to meet it, the intensity in his eyes took my breath away. For a fleeting moment, the world seemed toasted still. The next morning, Athene suppressed me with breakfast, pancake cigs, and a fresh pot of coffee awaited in the kitchen. What all this, I asked, hushed by his effort. Just wanted to start your day right, he said, flashing agron as we ate. His compliments came freely. You look beautiful today, he said, his tone casually, but his expectant. Ethan, but I mean it, you always do. I felt my cheeks flush, and I quickly busied myself with my plate. You're going to spoil me, I said, attempting to keep conversation light. You deserve to be spoiled, he replied, his voice soft. You do so much for everyone else. You should know how much you're appreciated. His words stayed with me long after he left for the library that afternoon. The way he looked at me, thoughtfulness of his actions. It was becoming impossible. Ignore the shift in our relationship. I found myself analyzing every interaction, every lingering glance, every touch that seemed to carry a deeper meaning. That evening, Ethan returned home with a bouquet of flowers for you, Hesed, his tone light, but his eyes warmed just a little. Thank you for everything you do. I stared at the delicate blooms, touched by the gesture. They beautiful, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Thank you, Ethan. As the days passed, our bond grew only deeper. He seemed to go out of his way to brighten my days, leaving notes on the bathroom mirrors, surprising me with thoughtful gestures, sharing conversations that felt more intimate than ever before. It was in these moments that I realized how much it looked forward to his company, how his presence made the house feel warmer. One night, after a particularly long day at work, I found Ethan waiting for me at the clinic. Need a ride? His grin lighting up the dark of evening. He took me to a small, quiet restaurant, the kind of place I hadn't been to in years. Over dinner, our conversation took a more serious turn. Are you happy, Mom? He asked, suddenly his tone earnest. The question caught me off guard. I don't know, I admitted. It's complicated. His gaze softened and I reached across the table, his hand brushing mine. You deserve to be happy, his voice steady. You deserve so much more. That night, as I lay in bed, his words echoed in my mind. Our bond had shifted, deepened in ways I had anticipated, and I couldn't deny the growing connection between us. It was exhilarating, terrifying, and utterly consuming. The weeks of winter passed in a blur of quiet moments and lingering emotions. Ethan's presence had become a constant source of comfort, his thoughtful gestures and kind words filling the void in my otherwise ominous life. Yet as our bond deepened, so did my unease. The lines between mother and son, lines I had always believed to be unshakable, were beginning to blur. One evening, after a long day at clinic, I came home to find Ethan waiting for me in the living room. Fire crackled softly, casting warm shadows across the room. He stood as he entered, his hands tucked into his pockets, an unusual nervousness in his posture. Hey, Mom, he greeted, his voice quieter than usual. Hi, sweetheart, I replied, setting my bag down and shrugging off my coat. Is everything okay? Hesitated for a moment before